50 years since the first work on AI began. We don't know whether this period of maturation is, another 50 years or another 10 years or 5 years or whatever. And we don't know what's coming out on the other side of maturation. One level, AI freezes its predetermination. So if lack of trust, lack of forgiveness is predetermined, if I am going to smite your family because your family smited my family, that's now stuck in a way that it wasn't before. On the other hand, AI has proven to be a forcing function in very peculiar ways. The resistance to that idea is deep and pernicious and understandable in many ways. And if AI freezes that view, then it will be that much harder to dislodge.
Welcome, listeners. Today, I'm excited to have a true beacon in our midst. An innovator, advisor, and educator, Art Kleiner is the principal and editor-in-chief of Kleiner Powell International and a partner at Wise Advocate Enterprises. A writer, editor, and entrepreneur, he speaks and consults on topics related to responsible AI and human behavior, as well as organizational learning, the future of work, scenario planning, strategic thinking, and the neuroscience of leadership. It goes on. He's a former editor-in-chief of Strategy Plus Business and a managing director at PwC. Art now teaches the future of digital media in New York University's Interactive Telecommunications program. His new book, The AI Dilemma, co-authored with Juliet Powell, integrates the perspectives of engineering, business, government, and social justice to provide a practical framework for understanding the potential benefits and pitfalls of generative AI and other automated systems. I'm honored to have Art join us today. So let's start. Hello, Art.
Mohammed, good morning. It's so great to be talking with you this morning.
Likewise. I was really waiting for this interview, and I've got a lot of questions for you.
Well, I look forward to the conversation. Here we are.
All right. So let's start with your personal life. So right, I have one question for that. So my first question is, you started with a Bachelor's of Arts in English and a Mass Media from the University of California and a Master's in Journalism from the University of Berkeley. But then you transitioned to a renowned career in responsible AI and strategic management, which is quite a journey. So can you share with us what sparked your passion for responsible AI, and was there a particular moment in your career that steered you into this direction?
My career has always been oriented towards three things when I look back: machine learning, human learning, and organizational learning. I went to journalism school because I was interested in writing fiction, and I realized I didn't know enough about people. And I had been a little bit turned off to the academic route. So I went to California, I went to the university at Berkeley, and I took a journalism degree there. I had thought that would involve me in understanding how the world worked. And I went to work for a publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was it won a National Book Award. It's very well known on the West Coast.
Wow.
And it was one of the early leaders in writing about personal computers, along with many, many, many other subjects. And it kind of took a systems approach to understanding the world. And I naturally was inclined that way. The things that affect each other are often widely separated in time and space. It's not easy to see the interrelationships that matter from the interrelationships that don't. And I was interested in trying to figure them out. So I was very lucky and worked in a publication where quite a number of people were at the leading edge of exploring those kinds of questions. I got very involved in writing about computers at a stage when the personal computer was really emerging and evolving very rapidly. and I was in the center of that for a while, got to know many people in the field. And then I kind of burned out on writing about computers. I didn't yet see the way in which digital technology sort of freezes and automates human interest. And I was very interested in why people act the way they do. And I had a few kind of core beliefs at that time that are not yet proven. The first is that people choose what's going to influence them. They don't get influenced by things sort of against their will. So there's always there's no such thing as being brainwashed by the media unless you're already disposed in that direction by the people you know or the
That's
culture with. And I can't prove that, and I can't even prove it to myself, but I believe that will turn out to be true. I also believed that any criticism of someone else should be applicable to yourself. So that if I was going to criticize someone else for being small-minded or partisan, I just didn't want to be hypocritical and have that same critique applied to myself. And that meant that any argument that I would make people could disagree with it, but at least they would have to agree that I had treated the argument fairly and really understood why they were making it.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Yes.
It does, but it's really difficult because it means you're going to argue against something. You have to understand why, not just that people feel an opposite way, but why they do and what has led them to disagree with you. And then you have to figure out, if you want to be persuasive, what the difference is. And most people are not open to being persuaded. So it becomes a very challenging and difficult stance to take. And then the third was that I really wanted to understand how to live without discipline. I wanted to find a way for discipline to just be endemic into my life because of the way that I structured it, without actually having to pay attention. And that turned out to be just a fool's errand. But that's kind of where I was. And I grew up in the hippie era and sort of took it to heart. Do what feels right. Mm-hmm. And I didn't understand the extent to which we are influences of our sensation in the same way that our sensation is influencers of us. So those became kind of preoccupations. And in that context, writing about computers seemed a little bit small and technical. And I left Whole Earth, I moved to New York, got married, and I started teaching at NYU, and I started writing about business, because behind every technology story is a business story, and then behind every business story is a culture story. And in the early, yes, and I started writing about the culture of business and starting to build working relationships with people who were writing books. One of the first was a management thinker named Peter Senge, and he was writing a book called The Fifth Discipline, and I helped him with that and with the Fifth Discipline Field Book Series, and became very interested in organizational learning and all of the practices used to work to affect organizations. And I was really interested. It was obvious that organizations are sort of sentient in their own way. They have a personality and a core. And I wrote a book about that called The Core Group. I wrote another book called The Age of Heretics, which is a history of the social movement to change corporations for the better. And then I wrote a lot of articles about management thinkers and worked with Peter Schwartz on his book, The Art of the Long View, and learned about scenario planning and the methods of scenario planning. Wrote about that also in The Age of Heretics and began practicing it. And then in 2005, I was invited to be editor-in-chief of Strategy and Business, as you said. That was with Booz Allen Hamilton, which was a 20,000 person consulting firm working largely with the US government. But they had a global commercial side, and I was with that part.
Wow.
In 2008, they were bought by the Carlyle Group and spun out the global commercial side, and I went with them, and for about 5 years, 6 years or 7 years, I was part of that entrepreneurial venture, a 3,000 person global consulting firm, again, publishing their very visible magazine. And then they were acquired by PwC in 2014. And I went with them to the largest professional services firm in the world, an accounting firm. Learned a great deal about how major accountancies and highly regulated companies work. Again, was very prominent because I was editing the magazine that was one of their major public faces to the world. I left, we parted ways the same day that the first person with COVID landed in the United States in January 2020. So since then, I've been writing and editing and consulting independently and with Juliet Powell in Kleiner Powell International. And Juliet had done a thesis at Columbia on self-regulation and whether AI companies could regulate themselves. I had been interested in AI since my time back at Whole Earth. I actually wrote a book about robots in 1982, a children's book.
Wow.
So we teamed up to write a book based on her thesis, which was published last year.
Congratulations, Art.
And now we're as soon as the ink dries on the page, a book on AI is obsolete. So
you're right about that. Absolutely.
So we're looking at what is going on now, and I know you're very involved in work on misinformation, and I think that along the way I also partnered with a neuroscientist named Jeffrey Schwartz and an executive coach named Josie Thompson, and we wrote a book on sort of the self-discipline and inner, I don't want to use the word mastery, but the inner focus setting and that comes from directing your attention where it needs to be directed and having the discipline to do that. And that is grounded in neuroscience. And that book, which is called The Wise Advocate, and the work that we're doing on AI and all of this question about, what does it mean to choose your life at this moment in history? All of these things are sort of together in what I follow now.
Wow, Art, you just rekindled my faith in publishing content and editing content, and you also gave me the importance of how to pull threads and find another thread to question about. That's very interesting.
Oh, it was. I don't think my trajectory. I think many people have very complex trajectories, and they say about, they say what they've done or where they've been, but the really important thing is how it all fits together and what drew them in. And a story like this, from me or from anyone else, is just a small part of it, because why they do what they do is Harry Nilsson. There's a Harry Nilsson song called Maybe, in which he says, maybe I'm doing what I'm doing what I'm doing because I've done what I did when I was a kid. And I think that's a lot of where we all are. Anyway.
Very nice. All right. So let's move on to the next question. So we're delving into the topic of the day, AI and cybersecurity. So my first question is that you compared the evolution of AI to raising a child, right? Initially sweet but rapidly growing with unknown future challenges. So how does the rapid growth of AI impact cybersecurity, and what kind of unforeseen troubles do you foresee?
The tagline for the Whole Earth catalog was, "We are as gods, and we might as well get good at it." And that was Stuart Brand's line, and it is, of course, a direct play on Genesis. The snake tells Adam and Eve, "You will be as gods. Don't do it." And it's too late. So if you're going to open that door, then you need to understand, you a person or you a species, need to understand how to govern yourself or how to stop caring about the future. Those are your two options.
Yeah. Both have a negative trajectory, you know.
Now, the definition of stop caring about the future is not, I want the worst to happen, or I don't care what the worst will happen. The definition of that is, it's too complicated. I don't want to deal with it. I'll cross that bridge when I get to it.
Yeah, what's going to happen is going to happen. Yes.
Well, that's to me a very pernicious. I don't just believe in free will. I've internalized free will. I don't understand how it's possible to believe in predestination.
Okay.
It doesn't make any sense to me, because at any moment, we decide whether to move our finger or not, and actually within the brain, that decision is made long before, microseconds before we move the finger itself, and the decision is made by our attention. 9 billion people are using their attention in 9 billion ways. It's not, if you believe that all of that is predetermined, it doesn't matter. It might as well have free will. So the challenge with looking ahead and caring about the future is, if you care about it and you have any level of empathy at all, then you take on a sense of responsibility for everything turning out. Now, that doesn't mean taking on the burdens of the world on your shoulders, but it means having a poetic appreciation for ways in which decisions unfurl going forward. What does all this have to do with AI? There are a lot of messages about how AI is different than the technologies that came before it. And so it's like, all unhappy families are different. Tolstoy said, all messages about what the real difference of AI is. My view of what the difference with AI is that AI is the first technology that automates what a human had to be in the loop to do before, and thereby mechanizes the free will type of decisions that people have made.
Okay.
Based
on what you said earlier, what came to my mind is, who's influencing who? Is AI influencing humans, or is humans influencing AI?
Well, that is the question. So I've never said this before, and it's just coming to mind now. I'd have to think about it, but AI turns free will into predestination.
Yep, that's what was coming to mind.
If that's the case, what that means is that it is not yet, automated. What is it? No, the next wave of AI, general, the one that acts fully autonomously,
Oh,
automatic.
yeah, I don't know about that. I know about augmented
There's a
reality, but that already exists.
no, there's a phrase for it, and it's just I'm just blanking. But
Correct.
automatic, I think it's anyway. The the issue with predestination, is that until we reach a point of full autonomy and awareness on the part of machine interfaces, which is possible. I mean, who am I to say it's not possible? But before that point, it is a very before that point, it's predestination. It's the machines don't fully have free will. There's a boundary around what they can do. It does not seem like it in many cases, but they will not be able to fully break free of the data that's been fed into them and the algorithms that learn from that data. There is a limit. You could argue there's a limit for human beings too, but it doesn't feel like there is. And because of that, the way in which the systems operate is it freezes what people are capable of doing. It automates it at a very powerful level, and it sets it up to happen again and again and again within parameters that must be broken in some way. You know, learning is basically breaking what the system knew before, whether it's machine learning, organizational learning, or human learning. Learning involves breaking down what we already know how to do in order to do something new, unless we're truly learning on a blank slate. And none of those systems are blank slates. Therefore, when we set an AI system in motion, and that system is not just the technology, it's not just the data and the algorithm and the underlying hardware structures and all of that, it is also the organization that maintains it and the people who make decisions around it and those who use it and the regulations on it. When we set that in motion, we are automating and freezing the decisions that we make. That's different than, you know, operating a printing press or driving a car or what have you. It is setting in motion something that can act in ways that we don't know in advance, but that are carrying forth what we instructed it to do, and based on the data that we gave it to work with, and learning in ways that are highly complex, but also automated and bounded and repetitive and building on themselves. And that's the sense in which, so this is all a long-winded way of saying that's what it means. That's why the analogy of a child, right? I mean, are you a parent?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and how old are your children?
So my child turns 2 on the 9th.
Okay,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
so you're in a great moment of life, actually. It doesn't seem like it when they're there, but it's great. And it gets better and worse and better and worse, and then it gets better. I have 3 daughters. They're all right now in their 20s. And when the oldest was about 6 months old, I remember I would take care of her. I was working at home, and I would look down at the cradle or the crib, and I would think, I've got this. I'm going to be a great dad. I know just what I'm doing. And then she got older and her sisters came along, and I realized I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. And a lot of it, it's like being on a roller coaster and I can't get off, and I'm going to be on this thing for at least 18 years and, probably forever. Turned out it is forever. If you're a good parent, it's forever. And
Yeah.
that's where, but it doesn't mean I'm governing them like a parent would govern. And that's really important. We humanity, some small fraction of humanity that is nonetheless very highly influential. We set this child in motion. We created this array of children that can create more children. And they're all limited, but we don't know how they're limited. They're all immensely capable, but we don't know of what. Drones managed by AI are defining what happens in the war in Ukraine right now.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
And we don't know what the ultimate fallout from that will be. And so, and yet, if we care about and so we can say, okay, fine, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But if we care about the future, and we are willing to take to heart all the thoughts and feelings that go with caring about what happens to us, the people we care about, the world at large, then we are like parents. You have a child, the child goes into the world, the child's going to do amazing things. Some of them are not going to be terrific. And we will, especially in the first 18 years, we will be held responsible. I don't know how long the childhood of AI will be, but it's still in the childhood right now.
Yes, it is. Seems like it, yes. And that's a very interesting way to look at AI as a technology. I'm really surprised. That's a really interesting way, yes.
We don't know if it's 18 years. It's already been 50 years since the first work on AI began. We don't know whether this period of maturation is, another 50 years or another 10 years or 5 years or whatever. And we don't know what's coming out on the other side of maturation. But sooner or later, AI moves into what could be considered adulthood. And when that happens, the child is father to the man, as they say. I was talking to an AI, a research scientist in the field, Alexandra Diening, and she said, at some point the technology becomes the parent, in the sense that just as with human children growing up to care for their parents, at some point the technology grows up to care for us.
Interesting.
We don't have a good model for what that might look like. And some people, who talk about fully functioning general intelligence say that's not our model to have, that's the AI models to have. Okay, so now we're going to I'm just talking off the top of my head, Mohammed, but...
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. There's a lot to learn here, because the perspective of thinking of technology as a child is new to me as well. And I thought it's a really nice way to look at things. It's really incredible. So let's move on to the next question.
Well, just one last
sorry. Yes.
Have you worked for a large company?
I guess, yes, probably, yes.
Okay, so people who work for a large company are different than people who don't. Because in order to work for a large company, you follow a track. You go to a school that gives you, I was one of the very unusual ones who followed an off the beaten path track. But for most people, you go to a school, you get a degree, then you get an MBA or an engineering degree or something of that sort. You get recruited, you get hired, you get a position, and then you rise in that position and you're still in a track. And if you don't want to think about what's going to happen to you, and you just want all of the structures of life to be taken care of, undoubtedly, you marry, you have a family, you have leave that is at a certain time, you have benefits, you have a certain way of moving forward that you understand because it's kind of set up and everyone else understands. And there's a lot of feeling that goes into the desire to have that happen. And many people feel they feel stifled by that and they move out of it. But many people go into AI, they go into corporate life because they want that kind of structure so that they can devote their time and attention to what they really care about, which is often their family and their feeling of being supported. And
I agree. Yes.
they don't have to think about all that stuff. If you're freelance, you have to think about that stuff all the time. Where's my next paycheck coming from?
Yes.
What will I do?
Yes.
Who will take me in when I'm older?
Yeah, you're right.
And not just freelance, if you're in any kind of entrepreneurial or survival mode, most people. But you can be in this track, and people forget when they're in the track how being in that track affects their attitudes and the way they think about things. So AI does that for people. Reliance on technology does that for people. It allows you to put off thinking about the choices you make, at least in the professional side of things, because it's covered. And there's a huge attraction, I think, to AI from the beginning of the field that has to do with, let's build a machine that will allow us to delegate all the things that we don't feel like doing.
Or in other words, let's build a machine for us to think, for it to think for us.
Let's
right?
build a machine for it to think for us. And of course, the Sorcerer's Apprentice problem is who decides what the machine works on versus what the people work on.
Exactly.
Who decides to think about? Can you delegate that? It's sort of like, I'm waiting for the Gen AI app that's like a real personal assistant, where I don't have to tell it what to do. It'll just know because it's gathered from the data what to do. Well, is that ever going to happen? And if it does, would you like it? What would you do about all the things you don't know the decisions you don't know that it's making in the course of giving you what you think, what it thinks. Humans have free will, and I've internalized that, and AI in its current form reflects predestination, a form of predestination. And at some point, when the child grows up, it will reach the point where it's making those decisions. And by deferring choice to AI, we are doing what people do when they defer choice to anything. They are giving up their agency over what happens to them, which is a tremendously emotionally satisfying thing for people to do in many cases, because we are finite. And AI, in theory at least, is infinite. And the phrase I was looking for is called artificial general intelligence.
All right, okay. That's new for me. I'll look it up. Okay.
AGI is AI without limits, when it's no longer constrained by the boundaries of the data and algorithm, and is now operating as a way to, it has learned enough that it can learn to operate in areas where it was not specifically trained.
Okay.
It has a level of limits. And estimates of when that will arrive range from next week to never. So.
Okay. So now, Art, let's move on to the next question.
Okay.
So, the EU's AI Act categorizes AI applications based on their risk levels and mandates auditing for high-risk AI systems.
Yes.
So, how can similar regulatory frameworks be applied specifically to AI and cybersecurity to ensure that these systems are both innovative and secure?
My understanding of cybersecurity is that most attacks are deliberate crimes. That
Yes.
there are very few accidental breaches of cyber systems, which means that we are not talking about a discipline of safety in the same way that we would be talking about, safety against hurricanes. These are not acts of nature or earthquakes. We're not talking about building sturdy buildings because, somehow there's an inherent weakness in the digital world. We're talking about building secure systems that can stand up against the human desire to take advantage of other human beings. Okay? And that matters because that means we will never have perfect cybersecurity. There's no upper limit to the power of the threat.
That's what I went over earlier. A question that keeps coming up in most of our research or in our reports or the YouTube videos that we keep making is that it's like a cat chasing its own tail, right? Um, Cybersecurity is getting better with AI, but so is the cybercrime.
So in cybersecurity, I'm like, what I've just said is probably the limit of what I can say with authoritativeness.
Okay.
I'm not versed in the field at all. I've written about it from time to time, and I interviewed people about it way back, like 30, 40 years ago. And obviously the field has gotten so much more complex. But the two things that have stuck with me, so now I'm about to say things that anybody who knows the field would call hand waving. One is that in the absence of limits on human ingenuity, we rely on human stupidity. There are just limits to what human beings, including with AI, can think of to do to break in. And therefore, the defenses have to do with understanding the limits of human ingenuity, even with AI. So for instance, and sometimes that means very simple things will make a difference, like the most obvious one being you don't plug it into the internet at all. So you have crypto wallets that are held, they call them hard wallets that
Yes.
You just don't connect it. Now, is it possible to then have human ingenuity figure out how to get into that system through Bluetooth or something? Well, then that's where that part of the debate is. But then sooner or later you have to connect it to the internet because convenience. So then the question is, what kinds of simple universal measures can be used to make entry difficult, create barriers to entry on one hand. I'm telling you the most obvious thing. And then on the other hand, to understand the perpetrators and what they're likely to do. And, and then you're into the realm of what the FBI calls profiling people. And so the part of it that's always intrigued me the most is, what can you tell about a perpetrator from the patterns of their keystrokes, from the ways in which they click? And then AI allows them to mask their personality, but what can you tell about a perpetrator from the way they use AI? And how can these ever more complex perceptions of patterns meeting the perpetrator's perceptions of patterns evolve? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that's really interesting.
It is, definitely, yes.
And I think it is interesting in the sense of what does it tell us about human knowledge of human beings? So, for instance, is it possible that you can tell how to defeat a cyber threat perpetrator by analyzing their clicks on the keyboard? Well, probably yes. And you can probably detect intruders versus people who are just, there. And you can probably detect intruders who have gained access to somebody's password through phishing from the actual person who has the password by the way they click. And I would guess that a lot of the strange alerts that people get from banks, for instance, have to do with that kind of analysis. But I don't know, I'm just guessing. Then if you can guess that, if an AI embedded analytical cybersecurity group can discern that kind of facet of human behavior, what else can they discern? And what can they discern from the way somebody walks down the street or holds or gestures, or they tell who's been abused as a child from the way that they hold their posture, just through the analysis of patterns without ever understanding why this reality leads to that effect. Can they tell who has a high sex drive, or who is, or what someone's sexual orientation is, or whether someone's depressed, or whether, can they diagnose deep aspects of the human spirit from indicators of that sort? And by the way, if they can, that's called unacceptable risk in the EU AI Act. It's as overly managed. And then, if that's the case, okay, and so now I'm going to jump the shark, if you will. I'm going to leap into a whole other domain. One thing we know about laws is that they are always selectively enforced.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that they're enforced rationally, selectively, or that they're used as tools of power. Societies with the rule of law, they, a lot depends on what happens with local decision makers, but, and there is a real ethic of the rule of law, which carries the day in, countries that have taken it to heart in their culture and in their legal system. But it's always selective, because just like you can't pay attention to everything, you can't enforce every law all the time. You wouldn't want to. So and one of the constraints on the rule of law is that enforcement is limited by human capability. There's only so much that an authority can do. And things are left to slide. So now humanity has increased the power of enforcement dramatically. Cameras on every corner. There are countries where if you belong to the wrong group or you have the wrong record, you can't get on a train. You can't get on an airplane, without ever being told why. You can't get credit. And you can get arrested more easily than you could before. So what determines how these things are enforced? And that then gets thrown back on given that power and given the ability to tell things about people that we saw, we now require trust and forgiveness in order to live comfortably in society at a level that we never had before.
All right. Okay.
Does that trust and forgiveness exist?
I wouldn't want to answer that question.
I wouldn't count on it. So then the question is, when there is a need for something that affects human beings this deeply, do they create it in order to survive? This is the Industrial Revolution, starting with the Renaissance, starting with the printing press, created a need for choice. It created a need for individual action where it didn't exist before. And when people see the opportunity to choose and to live their lives how they will, to marry who they want or live with who they want, to take the profession they want, to work how they want, to move where they want, when people see that that is possible, they aspire to it, they crave it, and they sacrifice a great deal for it. I think that's why people go into debt. I think that's why people break with their families. I think they want to feel like they're in charge of their lives. And they crave not just the actual choice, but the feeling of choice. And what they don't always realize is that choice is difficult. It's hard to choose. But they want the feeling of being in control and of having options. Or at least enough people want that feeling enough of the time that it is driving a lot of what we see going around us culturally and politically. So AI changes all that, because in order to have choice, we now have to have a certain amount of trust and forgiveness in the social order around us. What is the war in Ukraine really about? Well, it's about a lot of things, and I don't know firsthand. But one of the things that's sort of obvious even to a casual observer is that an authoritarian country cannot exist next to a democratic country without disrupting the attitudes of the people who live there.
You're right.
And in very painful ways.
You're right, absolutely.
That's, and I think that is the three great conflicts right now. Oh God, this is so presumptuous, but if you were to say, what are the three great areas of conflict outside of Africa? You would say Israel and Gaza, Russia and Ukraine, and probably North and South Korea, even though that conflict is frozen. And then there's civil wars, but the three great conflicts between countries or populations. All three of those are over the question of how much freedom people will have and autonomy. And differing views of who gets to control their lives. And in all three cases, the technology in all three cases, the reason why the conflict continues is because trust and forgiveness are not possible.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I didn't know you were going to bring the discussion to... Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. You're right.
Or are not seen as possible. And, in the examples we have where trust and forgiveness have overcome issues like this, it's taken immense amounts of ongoing work. I guess you could say India and Pakistan is another case, but so for example, in Colombia, the ongoing civil war has more or less quieted because of a concerted effort towards trust and forgiveness. Same in South Africa. Both of these countries have immense problems, but nothing like what they had when they were in apartheid and civil war. So they're dealing with the aftermath of those problems in the same way the United States is dealing still with the aftermath of its civil war.
Yes, you're right. You're right.
And in all those cases, true trust and true forgiveness turns out to be much harder than it might seem from the outside.
I was thinking about that just a second back. It may seem like an easy topic, but it's not. Apparently it's not.
Well, and so then you ask, does AI make it harder or easier? And I don't think we know yet. On one level, AI freezes its predetermination. So if lack of trust, lack of forgiveness is predetermined, if I am going to smite your family because your family smited my family, that's now stuck in a way that it wasn't before. On the other hand, AI has proven to be a forcing function in very peculiar ways. In the same way that financial crises have turned out to be a forcing function. So, a third of PwC's business is in auditing. It's a profession that didn't exist in the same way 60 years ago because the laws were not in place. The laws are in place to balance the need for entrepreneurs to do new things against the need for people to feel a certain level of trust in the financial system and forgiveness if they overstep, which we call bankruptcy law. And that system in the United States and England, at least, and on the continent in Europe and most other places, has laws in place that require firms to be audited if they are to prove that they are compliant with these regulations. And they pay the auditors, but the auditors can't work for them. And there are rules in place about independence that make it possible for this system to come into place. Those rules didn't exist 40 years ago. They painstakingly emerged as a part of the consensus around how we're going to manage these incredibly powerful forces of large-scale finance. Well, now the same thing, that's what the AI Act is. It is the first step by a government to put in place the same type of auditing practice and oversight practice that we have in the financial system. And just as people chafe against the oversight in the financial system, for example, crypto, tech companies chafe against the idea that they should be audited. But the inputs and the need for it is the same because AI is the same kind of forcing function. It's the same kind of system that requires compassionate oversight. The solution, so tech companies, so then you have the problem, how do you keep stupid people from regulating smart people? And there are only a few answers to that. One is government has to hire smarter people. Government has to deregulate the government, which is, and get out of its own bureaucracy. You don't regulate the smart people, you let them do what they want. Or the crypto guys. Or you set up rules and processes that are transparent enough to keep everybody honest. And you try to put in place the constraints that prevent people from overriding and doing regulatory capture. And the problem is when I say you do this, that implies that there is someone doing it, but actually there is no you, there is no they. There's just a group of actors who have varying levels of influence in a complex system where they all affect one another. And so therefore the they is not like, there's no string master running the puppets who are called they. There is only a set of actors doing actions, and AI makes it, on one hand, more likely that that complex system will be simplified, and that's not a good thing, because a simple system here, the world is too complex to be managed by a simple system. On the other hand, AI makes some of these subtle relationships so much more obvious that people need to react. And it also makes it harder to hide. Like, we know what's going on in remote parts of the world because we have internet systems and
technology
AI.
made it easier. Yes, globalization.
On the other hand, we also know things that are not going on because misinformation makes it easier to make stuff up.
True.
And we don't know how to tell the difference.
No, we don't. Yes.
But because we don't know how to tell the difference, we can't function. And because of that, if something can't go on forever, as Herbert Simon said, it will stop. And so therefore misinformation will stop in some way. And AI raises these issues, and the European Union solution. So you know why the European Union started this whole AI Act and GDPR and their other one, which they have a third law, which regulates, the likes of Facebook and Google, the large companies, the Data Privacy Act. I think I'd have to refresh my memory about what its name is, but
I would say it's because everything that is created needs a law to govern it, right?
well, not necessarily, right? I mean, in Germany there were no speed limits on the Autobahn. Politicians were being maligned by misinformation in concerted ways, and that brought their attention to the fact that if it's happening here and it's affecting elections, what else is it affecting and what harm could happen? And academics started looking at the possible harm that could happen, and it's
Is that a fact though?
It's my understanding. I'd have to document it. So that's sort of on the edge of misinformation, perhaps.
Okay. Okay.
The way you just said that is probably one of our best defenses. But I don't think I'm just wriggling on the hook. I think that was part of it. Obviously, this is all happening in conversations that are not necessarily public. And the end result, but it's similar to when Enron collapsed, that led to changes in auditing laws, and similar when AI when elections go in ways that people don't expect, that leads to scrutiny of
Definitely.
Facebook and all these other things that is there abuse and misuse of algorithms that track human behavior and influence human behavior, and in what way? And then we're back to how are human beings influenced? And because there's so little full knowledge, because there's a lack of real knowledge about how people are influenced and the extent to which all this is happening, and so much misinformation, the EU began to look for overarching ways to establish some basic rules of governance. And the AI Act is a work in progress, just as financial laws are a work in progress. And
without a doubt, yes.
And the leading edge is going to be with auditors. And the auditors, there will be two types of auditors. There will be, just as there are in financial services, there will be the auditors who are licensed in some way that traces back to the government. And there are auditors who are hired to help you figure out how to get around the first group of auditors.
Who's gonna watch the watchers?
And well, yeah, who watches the watch robots?
Yes.
And well, that's about government using AI. But the auditors, the pre-auditors, the consultants who come into companies are going to be more like executive coaches than they are like conventional risk consultants, because the desire to use AI to get away with things and to bend the rules is going to be, and to make a lot of money by manipulating people. Those desires are going to be top of mind. And the questions are going to be, how can we get as close as possible to having things go our way without actually getting caught?
Interesting.
And the person coming in with AI advisory is going to be saying, well, actually, what is the purpose of your business here? Is it to avoid getting caught, or are you now, in the face of all this transparency, now going to try to do things in a more credible way?
Which is less likely?
Well, we have lots of examples in either direction. The biggest negative example right now is Boeing.
Okay.
Which has a big credibility problem based on actual problems with actual airplanes that are traceable to management flaws.
Okay.
Have a lot to do with not trusting engineers and not trusting and trying to get around regulatory practices. But there are examples of companies that have, in fact, I would say most engineering companies, most of the time, are being more stringent than they otherwise would be, not just because of compliance with the laws, but because they don't want the outcomes where they get embarrassed. We've seen now Toyota, Fargo, Volkswagen, Boeing. We've seen what happens. Yeah, they can weather the storm of a bad reputation, but they are never trusted the same way again. And there's data that shows that they never get trusted the same way again.
Interesting.
So when is that going to happen to Microsoft or OpenAI or Amazon or Google? In some sense it already has, but in some sense we haven't yet seen. Even Facebook Meta with Cambridge Analytica.
Yes, I just wrote about that, yes.
They didn't cross the line. I mean, people are still keeping their accounts on Facebook. It's probably the closest of the big tech companies to come close is Elon Musk's X. But not yet.
All right, so Art, my next question for you is, drawing from the example of Stanislav Petrov's intervention during the potential nuclear crisis, how crucial is human intervention in AI-driven cybersecurity systems?
Completely crucial, and the question is, how do you achieve it? By definition, AI systems are more complex than human attention can keep up with. It was relatively simple when there's one threat And Stanislav Petrov and his team are required to look only at that threat. And the threat, he worked for the Soviet Union missile defense, and his job was to interpret signals coming in of whether the US had launched deadly missiles at the Soviet Union. And he received a signal one day that the system had detected 5 missiles coming in. And the standard procedure was to send that message up to superiors, and they would retaliate, and who knows, we would perhaps have experienced a really deadly nuclear war. But instead, he sent a message saying, we have received this signal, but it looks like it's a malfunction of our detection system, of our technology. And then prayed that he was correct, but he was correct. It was a malfunction of the technology. There were reasons to believe that, but the reasons for believing that all had to do with his hunch. We've never seen just a signal of 5 missiles coming in with nothing else, with nothing else. This doesn't feel right. AI systems are not yet sophisticated enough to have that level of sensitivity. And depending on who you believe, they may never have that level of sensitivity. And so we need the human in the loop, but we don't know, we humanity, AI designers, don't know exactly how to embed that human and when to relinquish control. In one of the first cases where a self-driving car hit a pedestrian and killed the pedestrian, there was a human being in the car.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's not written about a lot, and that person is actually, I think has had some real legal, was accused of
naturally, yeah,
of negligence at best. And that person was not paying attention until it was too late, because human beings don't pay attention the same way that AI does. We have what is known as automation complacency, which is we are inclined to let the system take over because our attention is finite. And in many cases, they discovered this with flight simulators. The term automation complacency goes back to pilot training, when pilots let the automated co-pilot take over until they are needed. In a way, that's what AI is designed to do, to take over from all of those times when human beings don't want to pay attention. But if AI is not trustworthy, and if it has gaps and lapses, and it doesn't have what Ron Dembo calls the right level of risk thinking, then yeah, you need a human in the loop. But a human in the loop is not perfect either, far from it. And
yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah, you're right. Human error still exists.
So then you need, so then we're back on the, okay. Then we're back on the, living in an imperfect world where we either accept that things are going to happen, shit happens, as they say, or we try to quixotically, idealistically bend the world in our direction, and then we're into Don Quixote territory. The challenge with AI is it's created a kind of urgency, because we are as gods. We haven't yet gotten good at it, good enough. And it's not just, all of the big issues right now, AI, climate change, to some extent, these military and conflict issues, the democracy issue, they all have to do with human harm to human beings at a large scale, and whether humanity is capable of restraining the effects of its own choices. In a way, it wasn't just AI in that crib. We're raising about 5 really powerful babies all at the same time.
Although OpenAI just solved the problem, I guess. They had created, it was I read about this a couple of days back, that OpenAI came up with Critic GPT. So they have created an AI which is going to criticize OpenAI, is going to criticize ChatGPT, and is going to find problems in the programming or the error, and it's going to be a loop from there on.
Will it be able to handle misinformation that way?
I have no clue. We'll have to wait and find out.
You realize what that is? They've created automated peer review.
Exactly.
They're doing what academics do.
Exactly.
And that doesn't work. But it might work better in an automated system. Peer review is not. It's not. It has a lot of challenges, including the classic one, which is that if the peer review is all coming from within the same paradigm, the same view of what types of examples and problems are important, going back to Kuhn, then the peer review will just reinforce the same errors over and over again, until the paradigm shifts, the sense of what problems are important and how to think about them shifts. And it may well be. So if you're optimistic, so the structure of scientific revolutions, as Thomas Kuhn put it forward, is that science is hobbled by its own thinking constraints, by its own mental models, until those thinking constraints shift and we move from Newtonian physics to quantum physics, or we move from into thinking about genomes completely differently. Scientific consensus. And consensus matters because that determines what gets studied and how much resources are placed into studying it. And if you're optimistic, you say, well, great, AI comes along and it exposes the gaps in the current paradigm much more quickly and much more obviously, and therefore makes it possible to advance the paradigm in positive ways. If you're pessimistic, you say AI just simply automates the churn around the same paradigm and makes it more difficult to advance beyond it because it crowds out all of the other, it crowds out everything but its self-reinforcing stuff. So, and
that makes sense.
I'm an optimist by nature, and so therefore I get prone to being disappointed. So the challenge over bias and the fact that if you ask an image to generate a simple image, it will often embed a stereotype into that image. Ask for an image of people from Mexico and you'll get sombreros. Ask for an journey. You ask for an image of.
I believe that actually happened.
It totally happened.
Yes.
And I was giving a talk recently, and I don't use Midjourney, but I use DALL-E from time to time. And so I said, with all of this publicity around biased images, surely DALL-E has done something about it by now. So I did a test. The test took 15 seconds. I asked DALL-E for 2 images. Show me an example of successful corporate people who have risen, who are at the top of their profession, and show me an example of corporate people who are failures and who have been fired.
I want to know what happened.
Guess which group was darker skinned than the other?
I already know the answer. Yeah.
Darker skinned, older. The successful people were more gender balanced, but they were not the same people. They did not look like each other, and that was a 15-second test. And it was enough to say, you know, this is going to happen again and again and again, and you can't control it, because if you try to control it, then you get the, you know, the Black Vikings, and you know, you get obviously contrived efforts to correct for the original bias. So you need some kind of paradigm shift that starts with the premise that people are of equal value no matter what their ethnic background, no matter what family they were born into, or what parent they were born into. And human beings, you know, what I just said in some ideal world would be what all of us take for granted as true. And I know a lot of people who do take that for granted as true. It's not just something they put on, it's embedded in the way they think. Most of the people I know are like that. But that doesn't mean everyone is like that. And the resistance to that idea is deep and pernicious and understandable in many ways. And if AI freezes that view, then it will be that much harder to dislodge. And it has to be, if you're going to dislodge bias against some people, you have to dislodge it everywhere, not just in your crowd, or not just defensively. It has to be universal. And that is very difficult because human instincts do not move in that direction. And AI's predisposition reflects human instinct, because the human instinct is embedded in the vast quantity of data.
Which reflects to the point that technology is our child, right?
Technology is our child, and yet it will be at some point our parent. It will be creating these rules, because even if humans create the laws, the algorithms will determine how they are enforced.
That was awesome, Art. I mean, I wouldn't even have. That was amazing. Thank you, Art.
Oh, my pleasure.
It was awesome talking to you, Art, and I'm looking forward to a lot of more interviews with you and a lot more lectures on YouTube, as I already seen one, and I also look forward to reading your book as well.